Hello and welcome to episode 89 of the Dash News podcast. I'm your host, Mark Mason, and I'm joined by my two other hosts, Joel Valenzuela. How are you?
Peace. I'm doing fantastically, if that's even a word.
Excellent. And I'm loving the t-shirt as well.
Woo. I wonder who made this one.
Yeah, someone super talented, I can imagine. And that brings me on to my next host, Brian, aka Mastermind. How's it going?
Good.
You had a good week?
Yeah, thank God it's Friday.
You happy to be on the podcast?
No. Yeah.
You could just say you're satisfied to be on the podcast. It's like, yeah, I'm all right with it.
Right, and this week we have a super special guest. You know, we've had a lot of guests on the podcast, but it's not that often we actually get someone that has a kind of outside perspective outside of Dash. So I'm very grateful to our guests this week because they've come on very last minute. So we're completely doing this off the cuff as usual, completely unscripted. Welcome to the podcast, Kurt Wuckert Jr. How's it going?
Thank you, Mark. Glad to be here.
Did I murder the surname again?
It was brilliant, actually. British accent and all. I'd give you like a 99% right there.
Yeah. Well, guess what? I think you have the strange distinction of being only the third person on the podcast who could choke us all out.
Oh man, who are the other two? Chell Sonnen and
Rory McDonald.
Oh yeah, no, they would choke me out too. So that's
yes, but you're still in that like choke any of us out kind of stage.
This is true. I got the I'm the ultra heavyweight Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt, part-time MMA coach, but definitely not the level of those guys, but higher than most, I guess.
Yeah. Now, have you gotten your school or whatever to accept Dash yet?
No. I have tried for years now to even get them on a reasonable credit card processor. So the gym is it's more of a club than a whole thing. And actually, we've got like 100+ competitors and stuff out of Chicago. But the owner he owns a roofing company. So the gym is kind of like his like, yeah, we've got the best mats and the best team in the world, but I also am not like, building the mecca of jiu-jitsu either. So it's just kind of like, pay your bill and come train. If you're really good, maybe you don't have to pay your bill.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've as someone who's been in martial arts schools before, I know that kind of a thing. Yeah. Although the roofing thing isn't an excuse because one of the biggest Dash advocates out there, Danny Sessom of the Crypto Show, also does roofing all the time. So that's like his main business. His main business for a while has been roofing, but then he runs a crypto show and does various Dash things that are just too long to list. And when his proposal is not passing, he always says, "Hey, leave some comments on all the million things that I do." And I'm just like, that should be you telling him. Like, you do everything, and people just don't know because you don't tell them. You won't want me to tell them.
That's
anyway,
pretty funny.
He's a solid dude.
So let's get some little bit of background. I suspect most people are already familiar with Kurt because there was a video interview that was published on dashnews.org, but actually done on Kurt's platform, Crypto Traders Pro, which Kurt is the co-founder of. But if you didn't know and you've just discovered this podcast and you're not familiar with Kurt, do you want to give a very brief summary of what Crypto Traders Pro is?
Sure. So Crypto Traders Pro is an educational community and an entrepreneurial think tank in the crypto space. I've been a Bitcoiner since 2012. Was in and out of whether or not I wanted to be an anonymous Bitcoiner. But then ultimately in 2017, me and a couple other guys hooked up and decided like, hey, you know what? Let's teach people how to deal with this bull run appropriately, like portfolio management and business opportunity. So we put together CryptoTradersPro.com to teach people how to trade for profit, and then how to jump in and provide other value, basically. I think a lot of people jump in and they're like, hey, I'm going to buy some coin and then I'm going to be rich in X amount months or years. And that's just not how it works. So I tell everybody that all value is proof of work. And if you
all
can
value
provide
is belief.
Chuck's going to disagree with you on that one.
Yes.
I'd be happy to debate.
All value is belief in the value of said work.
True. Well,
How about
speculative. I would agree that all speculative value is indeed belief. However, real value, it must come from some utility. I believe that utility is work. So
yes,
super philosophical. But anyway, so teaching people how to trade, how to manage their portfolio, and how to not get scammed. It really was a product of the kind of ICO bubble, and me explaining to so many people on social media, like, no, that is a scam. No, they're going to steal your Ethereum. No, they're going to, and people just like, no, man, you're crazy. And then, BitConnect starts to fall apart and all these different things. And
what am I going to do?
Exactly. So it turned into a business of us pointing out shills, scams, scammers, and just bad portfolio management. And now it's full time.
Yeah, 2012 is pretty early. How did you get into Bitcoin?
Anti-central banking activism. So I was a Ron Paul guy. I was a Ron Paul volunteer in 2008 and 2012. And then I don't even remember who exactly, but somebody was like, hey, what do you think of Bitcoin? I didn't know what it was. My initial reaction was, well, it's digital fiat and like whatever. This seems like a terrible idea. And then I went and read the white paper. Was like, oh, actually, like this is frictionless digital gold. That's fascinating. So
that's great.
Got in.
Which, the whole Ron Paul connection, of course, I still got my Ron Paul 08 campaign still over on the Fed thing. So nice. It's funny. It's a constant theory of mine that if we have ideas and ideologies and we pursue them honestly, then we're all going to end up kind of in the same spot. The best path to it. So you said you're all pursuing scams and stuff, like trying to find out scams. Then what the hell are you doing on a Dash show, huh?
So yeah, there's a conversation.
We'll get into that later. Sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah. So anyways, so I ended up getting into Bitcoin. I started buying it just person to person, cash for paper wallets. And then in 2013, it's the first Coinbase transaction that I ever made. I got a Coinbase account in 2013. So that's like the first proof that I have that I had Bitcoin in 2013. But I've always been a business guy. I've owned a couple of companies. My printing company accepted Bitcoin in 2014. A couple of things. I've just been in the business space and always really liked the idea of sound money. And but using it, I believe that money has to have business velocity to have value as well. So that's kind of been my march. That's my battle cry.
Where are you today in terms of your crypto holdings? So you mentioned Crypto Traders Pro, so you must be familiar with many crypto projects. So you very well diversified. Like, show me your colors. What's your allegiance? What projects are you supporting?
Precise amounts, of course, are none of anyone's.
You're right. Yeah, I'll hand over my private keys live on the air here.
Well, thanks. There's plenty. I know. There's a few people waiting in the live chat for that. So
absolutely,
just make sure you drop it there. So first come, first serve. Am I right?
What does your portfolio look like? What projects are you invested in?
So in the crypto space, like I actually am a big believer in going big on things that matter, actually. So I started being a Monero miner in 2016, post scaling debate, all of that. So yeah, I know that's the big red flag on the Dash podcast, but so that was a significant portion of my portfolio. I've actually soured a little bit on Monero for a number of reasons that we can go into maybe later. But
yeah, sure.
Dash is another one that I have held on to for a good amount of time. But right now I consider myself ultimately a Bitcoin maximalist, but with a very careful caveat. Like I believe very much in the economics of the white paper. And I believe that if the white paper is followed, the economics bear out success. Now, BTC, I think, has left that roadmap. They've decided to be, in my opinion, a developer centralized coin. So I'm not hot on Bitcoin. I would not personally be buying BTC today. However, I still have some that I bought years and years ago. I saved my first purchase, is just kind of there collecting whatever value it can collect, which is significant at this point. But I keep it pretty small, actually. So I don't hold any Ethereum. I did buy some Ethereum in 2016 as well, but I'm, again, soured on that project. I have a little bit of Digibyte because I think it's a really interesting progressive proof of work project. Otherwise, not much else really. So I'm probably 5 or fewer coins as part of my whole crypto portfolio. And even most of that is just sort of like, I'm going to hang on to it and we'll trade it when it spikes, basically.
When did you get into Dash?
Dash was probably a 2017, probably early 2017. I think for me, like initially, I definitely bought into the Instamine, Evans a fraud, the whole thing. Like the narrative there.
The Monero connection.
Correct. Yeah. I was a Monero guy, and it just everyone is like, no, that is a total scam project and all of that. But the thing that always intrigues me is that consensus is governance. Like that's the point, is that we have digital money. USD is mostly digital currency, right? Like, so it exists out there, but the problem is that it's not governed by proof of work. And then the governance model of Bitcoin, like I said, I consider myself a Bitcoin maximalist. I liked Monero because it had a little bit of a spin on it. But then Dash, once I looked into how the DAO works and the way that the distribution of the block reward goes to self-funding its own network, it just intrigued me. I wasn't sure that I loved it, but I was like, okay, that's a different idea, and I'm curious how it'll play out. And then basically just started snagging some of it, and just like, well, okay, this will probably, it'll be intriguing at the very least. It'll be something that's worthwhile. So Dash is one that, like, I believe that if the ultimate Bitcoin model fails, then something like Dash would be more likely to succeed. So I consider that my hedge amongst interesting governance coins.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting point, because I guess you have the exact same sort of thought process as I do, except just kind of different points on the journey. Whereas first I thought, when I heard about Bitcoin, is like the first of all of them, I just thought this is cool. And I start hearing about, well, how does it work? Is it decentralized? How does that work? How do the economic models work? How do decision-making work and all that kind of stuff? And then when Mike Hearn came out and was just like, the whole thing's terrible. Like, yeah, I was just like, well, like, salty person, you're going to work for some bank. Like, I didn't get it at the time. And then just over time, I was just like, man, this dude knows what he's talking about. And I just migrated to seeing that, our Lady of Infinite Forks, peace be upon her, right? Just Bitcoin is fork. Sure. And then Bitcoin Cash, I was like, well, that got that element out. And then now you got a split. And now I started to see that there's probably going to be one Bitcoin per viewpoint. Whereas you have you have a lot of diversity within a certain structure of parameters with Dash, and there is a kind of consensus that goes along with it. And I've kind of become much more bullish on that. I kind of see the first element as failed, and the second element, the Dash approach, as not yet failed. Let me just say, like, I believe it's succeeded, but in perfect honesty, it just, I thought the same of Bitcoin until I saw some problems. I just don't see any issues with that. So you're kind of like feet in the both worlds, right? You're kind of like, well, I'm going to hold on to what I first believed in, but if that doesn't work, then this, if not A, then B. It's a very logical choice. Like, if this doesn't work, then this has to be what works.
Yeah, and I think that's wise for anybody. I mean, it's the same thing if you're going to invest in gold as a hedge against whatever. Well, I can't put everything into gold because the world may not melt down, and then I'm just sitting on a bunch of heavy metal in my house that doesn't really turn into anything. So I also have to, earn fiat or whatever to live my regular life. And I think that that's a reasonable thing. And I tell everybody, like, as far as portfolio goes, people should be looking to get other hard assets. Other things have value. So, whether that's ammunition because you believe we're going to live a full-blown, meltdown scenario, or if that means something like real estate or other ways to accumulate long-term wealth.
Yes. So, fun fact on the ammo thing, when I moved to New Hampshire, which is crypto paradise, like a little bit before, I had an AK, and then after some news headlines happened, which of course in Arizona everything's like, disclaimer for people that live in like socialist hellholes like the UK and like Illinois, when perfectly legal and everything. When some stuff happened in the news, then the price went up on such items, and so from the profit with that, I was able to fund my move. I was so broke when I moved here. I was able to fund the move off of that. So you already see the value of things going, just like with Greece, then Bitcoin goes to the moon. And just like bad things like ammo goes to the moon. And it's like, yeah, I mean, pretty much precious metals I'm much less strong on precious metals these days, but still precious metals, lead and crypto are kind of like the holy trinity of store my value.
Right. Yeah, no, and that covers all plausible scenarios, right? And then at the end of the day, you could walk outside and have an aneurysm or something, and like, well, good thing I planned ahead, and like that's just life. So ultimately, also just live your damn life.
I'm curious to learn more about how you view Dash. So previously you mentioned about sustainability. That's a very big topic in cryptocurrency this week, because recently there's news that came out about the NEM project, and the news came out, said they only got like 1 month left of funding, which actually presents a lot of questions, such as example, should they let the community know before? Should they, financially, a lot of people could get ruined if they were heavily invested. When's the right time to say something, when's something not? But Dash is unique because we don't have leaders, because we're completely decentralized. So we're very unique in that case, being the DAO. And I think a lot of people don't truly understand that about Dash. So what are your thoughts on Dash on the whole leadership side, and having like no like messiah figure? We're just kind of we're just completely, we are decentralized, we're self-sustaining, and it's unique, I think.
It is, and I'm not an expert on all things Dash, so as far as economic balance goes, I'm not positive on all aspects of it. I'm definitely a proof of work guy. I will talk mad garbage about proof of stake all day long. And that's something like NEM, for example. Like I believe that's the nature of their problem. The old world economy is proof of stake, right? It's work done yesterday that is benefiting you today by inflation, and that's the proof of stake. Yeah, which is a debatable part of the stake argument, but
which that is funny, by the way. We just sort of collect what you saw about old world wealth and stuff. Like literally, I could just sit here, someone can just gift me a large stake in the network, and I just have it. And with Dash, you can do that with, say, Masternode, Share, whatever. But that doesn't actually run the network itself. You need current work. And someone can just sort of you can't generationally pass down mining equipment. It's just not going to work that well. So it is interesting to have that balance, because I do believe in savings and creation of wealth and the transmission of said wealth across from, because people die, right? Everyone dies. What are you going to do? Just like you just work your whole life and then you're gone and the human race doesn't advance. I believe in that, but I also believe in constant new work being done.
Right. Well, and it needs to be both. And I think that's actually the beauty of Dash, is that, so if you've got a proof of stake model, yes, it is an inflationary inheritance model, that if you were smart enough to accumulate early, you can accumulate power over a certain thing, and then you can distribute that as you please, and then you're paid dividends simply for existing. And that's, proof of stake by itself, I think, is awful. I think it's everything wrong with the old world model. However, it does have certain benefits on a distributed consensus network. And since Dash ties it back to proof of work, like that's actually the thing that made me the most interested about Dash initially. As far as I know, Dash was the first to kind of do a both and model, to use the perks of proof of stake, the speed and that sort of thing. And then some of the other benefits of having a second layer stake network. But tying it back to proof of work on a regular, known, auditable schedule, I think is a really, at the very least, it's a very creative idea. And that's what actually piqued my interest in it initially, is to say, okay, like I know I don't like things like NEM or Stellar or Ripple, these kind of things, because I don't like that proof of stake model fundamentally. But taking that and tying it back to the proof of work is what made me say, okay, like that's the kind of governance that I think is creative enough to have to merit a second look, and so that's why I've given Dash more than a second look, actually. But
Is it Bitcoin that helped you shape those views, though? Because in terms of, you're right, Dash was the first crypto DAO being self-funding, self-governing. But I think there's a lot of parallels actually in our thought process, because we both are strong believers in digital cash. So I'm just curious, because I think there's a lot of people that made the jump from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash that had issues with the kind of governance mechanism of Bitcoin. They were kind of upset with Blockstream and other issues and the core team, and they and they started asking themselves questions about projects, saying, is it just about leaders? Are we always going to be dependent on donations or third-party outlets for the actual project to move forward? And it was only when things come to a standstill, you have to make a decision, and you have to draw a line in the sand. So, like, was that what made you? Because you jumped over from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash, right? At one stage,
and am now a Bitcoin SV advocate. So the reason for it, you have to look at what the actual goal is. Like right now, all proof of work coins are living in a subsidy. We're all being subsidized by the block reward. The block reward is purposely running out on a specific schedule that everybody should know if they understand how the tools work. And what that does is it gives you a ticking time bomb that tells you at a certain point, you all have to figure out how to create a self-sustaining network. And when it comes down to it, a self-sustaining network cannot have, with pure proof of work, it cannot have paid devs, for example. So as a developer, you look at guys like Adam Back or Jameson Lopp or your main sort of Bitcoin Core developer crew, and them saying, well, how do I make myself more important to the network, though? And and then you got Blockstream, who came in to say, hey, we'll fund you, we'll pay some of your salaries, you can do these developmental things. And I think that that's a big problem, because it's innately a conflict of interest. And that's why Bitcoin Cash forked away, is they looked at it and they said, well, hang on, the governance model is actually that the people who earn money are the people who do the work. They're the infrastructural backbone of the network, which on Bitcoin is only the miners. Miners are the infrastructure. They're the ones that earn by doing work. The devs are essentially creating arbitrary work for themselves, but nobody owes them for it. There is no payment model for that. So something like Dash, like that's what I like conceptually about the DAO, is that they said, well, we can do both, right? We can have miners who are incentivized to make the network better, but then we can also have a funding mechanism to have more progressive ideas and that kind of thing. So whether or not that works long term, I don't know, because I don't know how that all peters out when the block rewards and all that go away on a hybrid proof of stake, proof of work network versus a pure proof of work network. And only because I haven't sat and audited it and done the math myself to really look into what all that takes. But that's ultimately why I ended up in the BSV camp, is because they look at it and say, look, the governance model of Bitcoin is set in stone. The software can be upgraded, the hardware can be upgraded, but the economic model works. The economic model creates a self-sustaining network after the subsidy runs out, if everybody uses the transactions. If the blocks are being used, if there's lots of transaction fees, then the miners have an incentive to mine the network, and then we all get money for the world. So
essentially, it kind of removes the governance question by having there be nothing to decide on, just participate or don't. For example, if you have Dash and you say, do we do a big block approach? The network clearly votes. That's what happened. Or you go to Bitcoin, other Bitcoins, and do we do literally anything? Okay, million splits. Like that's just kind of how it works. And then you go to, I guess, when you arrive at the SV approach, which is no more decisions ever. And then you just kind of stick to that model, and you don't even have to address the governance thing. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
Well, no, because that's the thing, is hash power is the governance. Like a fork is unpleasant. However, it's just like anybody else. Like as a voluntarist, I guarantee that you believe that you have the right to withdraw your consent to participate at any time. Whether that, no, I did not harm you, and therefore I withdraw my consent to be governed by you, and I'm leaving. Peace out. And that's the governance model.
But that's the difference, though, because we're a community-driven project. The community decides our fate and destiny, whereas opposed to you either have to subscribe to the developers and their vision, and if not, as you say, opt out. You've got like one choice: opt in, opt out. Whereas we're not dependent on leaders. In fact, there was a core proposal in our last cycle that wasn't going to pass because the network expressed concern, and they had to compromise on that and offer something different for it to actually pass. So I think in terms of longevity, that's kind of what attracted me. When you was talking about your jump from Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash, and I know you're on the Bitcoin SV now, but how did you feel about because one of the common themes that we always hear is that people were just fatigued about the block size debate. You know, there was promised SegWit. It took a long time to integrate, and it didn't solve the problems. I don't even want to get into SegWit 2x because, you know, we'll be here for the rest of the podcast. But I mean, so block size is actually very important to you. This is why I want to get at. So block size to you is fundamental for you in your vision of what digital cash and cryptocurrency should be.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So the block size, I mean, it's crucial because without the subsidy, once the block reward goes away, the network has to have really high fees per block. However, in order for people to use it as cash or to use the network at all, you have to have an incentive for that. If demand increases, that it doesn't turn into $25 fees, because then it is completely dysfunctional. So in my opinion, I think it's crystal clear that the Bitcoin white paper fully intended for block size scaling to be the roadmap from day one. And there's really not another way to even make that work. Like Lightning Network and all these other ideas. In fact, SegWit stripping signatures out of the block hash is problematic because it creates block weight without creating extra transactions. So it adds bloat to the network that is, like, again, it's further not paid for. It actually kicks it the wrong direction from a funding model. So, you know, if we're going to have a completely like pseudo public private commons blockchain, it needs to run like a self-sustaining utility, and that requires big blocks, and it requires that those big blocks have lots of transactions in them very consistently. And then pure incentive to mine for profit is what secures them. And then it's, you know, in theory, it is this open utility that people can use for business or for whatever else. It's a distributed operating system. It's like a utility you can plug into and say, hey, this is way better than running my own server or whatever else.
Hey, I'm curious to hear why you soured on Monero. What was that about?
I know Brian was thinking that the whole time since you mentioned that. He's just like, when can I spring it on him? Whoom.
So it's the same thing. It's a governance issue. So if Monero was a proof of work coin, or it is a proof of work coin, and when you have a proof of work coin, it means the miners are the people that are reinvesting in the network. And as someone who has mined Monero, I look at that and say, like, okay, I have contributed infrastructure to this network, and therefore, being someone who contributed in, I should have more say than someone who, you know, for whatever, you know, they know how to code. That does not make them innately more valuable than somebody that is an industrialist contributing actual capital into the thing. It's kind of the Atlas Shrugged argument, right? It's like the Henry Reardon saying, like, hey, no, I'm actually building this world right now, and you're 99% just benefiting from it. So then when Monero decided to start forking, that they fork every 6 months to kick out miners that are quote unquote too efficient. And I can think of no more arbitrary thing than 6 or 7 guys sitting, you know, either in a room or on a digital chat like this and saying, you know what, we can decide what is the optimal amount of economic efficiency for mining, and kick out anyone who disagrees with us on the upside. Like, it strikes me as innately central planning, Stalinist, just bad. Not to mention, it also makes whoever makes those dev decisions they're the people to threaten or bribe, right? With distributed consensus, with miners all over the world, you'd have to buy or threaten all of them to control their hash or whatever else. But if you have a small group of devs that can arbitrarily make that decision, all you have to do is figure out where they are and either bribe or threaten them, and then you've just taken control of the network. So
what's the difference between that and SV? What's the...
So it's distributed consensus, plain and simple. So the incentive model, the incentive to mine long term is highest in the Bitcoin SV camp. So as blocks get bigger and they fill with transactions, there's more opportunity for more people to mine that than anything else. And as they make their way there, it becomes more geographically, politically, and every other kind of distributed, at least in theory. So they are not ever going to say that nobody can create a more efficient way to do it. They're, in fact, begging people, jump in, compete with us. If you can beat me, do it. I dare you. It'll be better for all of us if you do.
So let me get to the structural bit of that. So, well, first off, with the Monero, the way it tends to work out now, isn't it kind of the same in that they change the consensus algorithm every sounds like I'm defending, but whatever. They change the consensus algorithm every 6 months, and the miners can absolutely just keep mining the old one and say, now we like our ASICs, thank you.
Sure.
But as in, the developers actually have no say necessarily, other than, well, they just a developer-centric community, so everyone kind of jumps on whatever the developers say, including the miners, right? Sure. Or if there's a separately mined coin, people do not, because it doesn't have the blessing of the developers, it doesn't have value, therefore people don't use it. And so it's sort of the same, I guess, with, let's just forget the other Bitcoins and Dash DAO. Let's just talk about SV versus Monero here. Sure. That's essentially the same thing as the SV thing, except it seemed in that there are some developers that made whatever SV is today. And if they decided to just change something radically, then, which, they kind of built their branding around not, but if they decided to do that, then the miners, same with Monero, could either just stick with the developers or kind of veto them and stick with the old thing and deal with the consequences of that. So my kind of takeaway from that is there is no meaningful difference between the two. The only difference is cultural, meaning in the Monero culture, people follow the developers or the established few or whatever. They follow those people, where the Monero core team or whatever, I don't even know what they're called. I haven't pay attention too much. Fluffy, the magical happy crypto friends or whatever. They follow them. Whereas with SV, the miners from what that's what I'm saying. I would say Craig Wright and Enchain, etc. But from what you're telling me is the culture is to not follow any changes, just to follow continuing on thing. And it seems like it's the exact same situation, except the culture is radically different, and that's what makes the coins different. What do you think of that idea?
I think that's absolutely true. It's completely fair, and I think the best parallel, I draw the parallel to religion. If you have, like, most coins don't have baggage, right? Like, how many people have read the Dash white paper compared to the Bitcoin white paper? It's probably many magnitudes smaller. So
I've read a few Dash white papers, including the Instant Stand one, which is pretty interesting because it referenced in 2014 a Bitcoin double spend white paper by something else.
Interesting. So I think the example here is that, like, the Dash community, for example, has decided that it is part of their community culture to consent to the DAO and the way that the block is distributed, to fund development and fund the DAO and fund miners, and that's the culture. That's what's appropriate in that culture. So I think of Dash as, say, let's say a progressive religion that is loosely based on, let's just say, the Bible or Abrahamic religion generally. However, if you go back to, like, what is Bitcoin is just as weird as asking a couple groups of Christians who is God, or what is Christianity, or what is truth, right? And if you talk to somebody who's like an Orthodox, let's say the Russian Orthodox versus somebody who's a Southern Baptist from Tennessee, and you're going to get two, like, I mean, they're primarily the same. They will actually agree on most things. However, they will get very, very stuck on the differences. Well, I don't like how you sing. I don't like the hat you wear. I don't like, these kind of things.
I don't like the hat anyone wears for that, for the record.
Well, and so that's the thing, is that Bitcoin does have an answer. Like, what is Bitcoin? There is an absolute truth there. Whether or not we can know it or agree upon it is a completely separate issue. And it's the same thing. If we were to believe there is a God, then we would say, like, there is absolute truth or there is a God. Can we know him? Can we know his will? I think the answer is primarily no, which is why we have infinite factions of religious people and irreligious people. And so it's a baggage thing. So when you come to SV, what SV is trying to say is like, look, we're very conservative about what Bitcoin is. There are 9 pages that were written on the internet 10 years ago that define what makes a Bitcoin. And it's everything from the way that the network is propagated. It's how transactions are signed. It is exactly what the governance model is. Who gets to make decisions about upgrading the consensus mechanism? And if you change that...
I think you'd get along very well with Vin Armani. He's big into the whole Bitcoin as religion stuff.
I get along pretty well with Vin generally. Yeah.
But isn't the bastardization of Bitcoin evidence that it doesn't work?
I mean, does the fact that there are Mormons mean that Catholicism doesn't work?
Possibly.
Basically,
I haven't thought into that.
Angle. Satoshi is God in this scenario.
Because
essentially, for the sake of the argument, Satoshi is God.
Yeah. And I don't mind the religious comparisons at all, because from a very practical standpoint, religions and crypto in this case are systems built around beliefs of stuff that's very important and that don't necessarily have like long time preference effects or none. But I'm just saying it's not instant. It's not like you do work, you get money right away. It's just like these are kind of far reaching consequences that you have to sort of philosophize about rather than feel them instantly.
What I like is that Christianity is the longest term experiment in decentralization that's ever occurred.
Lots of hard forks.
There are lots of hard forks. Does it mean that any of them are failures? Does it matter that there are quite a bit fewer Mormons than there are Catholics? Like they don't not have influence in their peers.
So this is an interesting thing about culture as it relates to this sort of thing is the Bitcoin white paper, the largest group that feeds off of that by a significant margin, believes in something radically different from the white paper that I would think that you and I would agree on at least. I don't think that they would, but the whole peer-to-peer electronic cash system, proof of work miners first, Satoshi consent, like all that kind of stuff is kind of turned into a more developer-centric, coder-centric, more, off-chain scaling solutions cannot touch the original block size, and everyone should run their own node. That's like the key tenet of the largest Bitcoin religion. And it's interesting that like the purist, the hardcore purist types, it's funny how that works in terms of the largest adherents, the largest group of adherents is completely different from what they used to be, what that thing used to be. So it's kind of interesting to see how it doesn't seem like the sacred texts, as it were, have really any bearing, because it just seems like it's an arbitrarily chosen, not arbitrarily, but it seems like it's just kind of chosen based on like what is the most successful one. So arguably, if we're talking about culture and culture which defines coins, then the Bitcoin, the Satoshi's vision itself, I'm not talking about Bitcoin SV, I'm talking literally Satoshi's vision,
generic
as
Satoshi vision,
is best understood, has been a very bad failure, because one of the very smallest groups that the least network of the, I would say, the non-scam Bitcoins, which I know a lot of people say Bitcoin Cash is a scam, whatever. The purest vision belongs to the smallest Bitcoin network, and the most bizarre, I guess, like the most evolved, shifted vision belongs to the largest one.
So here's another comparison.
That, guys.
So what's the largest? The largest faction of Christianity is the Catholic Church. They're the oldest. They were the first.
Ooh, I like that. This is gonna piss so many people off, but it's great. I don't mind it. Keep going.
Oh yeah, I don't want this to be a religious argument for an hour, but if you think about it this way, the group that became the Catholic Church started as a very small group of people who took those stories, and if you're an atheist and you just think I'm an asshole, that's fine. But assuming all of this is reality, Jesus Christ existed. As soon as he was gone, the Catholic Church established itself. It was very small. It grew organically and to become this giant thing. However, about 400 years after its inception, they started to say, you know what? Scripture, which we put together, by the way, is not the only source of information. Sola Scriptura is false. We have this ability to reconvene with God and to make further decisions about what is doctrine. And that was the first schism that part of the church said, like, from where do you derive that authority? And then as that began to happen, it turned into wars and schisms. And that's why we have a Protestant church and all these different, and then now dozens, if not hundreds of Protestant churches. And that's why. It's because...
But Jesus was Jewish, so wouldn't that make the Torah the white paper?
Sure. This is where it starts getting a little.
If Satoshi is God, is Evan Jesus or Muhammad?
Evan's probably Muhammad.
Joseph Smith.
No.
Oh yeah, I triggered Brian so hard. Well, let me shift from the religious debate because it's interesting how if the religious component of crypto, in my opinion, is how we know it is far, far, far from being mainstream, because people are using religious parallels, i.e. intangibles, to decide about it. Sure. And in a free market,
intangible?
Well, that's the thing, though. It as an intangible, it is destined to be something that doesn't really matter, because we shift to business and free market competition. People argue about socialism versus capitalism and things like that, and free societies versus not free societies, and everything in between. People argue about them, but ultimately they're arguing about results, and eventually the results speak for themselves, where you have socialist countries collapsing all over the world. Or you could say, that's not the right socialism country. Whatever. Wherever you fall in that thing, you see that system collapsing, this system prospering, this one prospering even more, this one, you see the practical elements. And what I would argue is that crypto, when it starts to turn into results-based systems and away from religious parallels, that's how we know that we're actually getting somewhere.
We're in the early stages. Yeah, we're in the early stages.
We are. And I think we're seeing that transition anyway. And frankly, we have to. That's, in my opinion, the beauty of the block reward halving is that every 4 years on Bitcoin, I know it's different on other proof of work coins. In fact, when is it on Dash? I'm not even sure.
Every year. 7%.
Every year. 7%.
Oh, really? Okay. So it's a faster ticking time bomb. And I think that's a good thing. And that should inspire, like, what is the value of this network? And it's to fill those blocks.
7% is, rather than a halvening, I think it's actually slower, right? Like, based on halvening is how many years? I forget.
4 years, over 4 years of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So 7% over 4 years, 7777. That's still like not, that's more gradual.
Yeah,
it's not quite as much of a shock.
Yeah. So it's interesting. But I think the point is that there is a ticking time bomb on every proof of work coin that has a deflationary aspect to it. Is that at some point you have full distribution, but it's not full distribution that is the end of it. Like, at some point, actually quite soon, we have to have built an economy that functions on top of these blockchains or a blockchain in order for it to be functional at all. And if we don't, I mean, then we all lost, and we were all just the idiot hopefuls. We were the religious people hoping for, the rapture is coming. God's going to bring us to heaven. And maybe we were all wrong. Maybe we were fighting for the wrong thing the whole time.
Yeah. So, well, that's the fascinating thing, is ultimately every single blockchain network has to think about profitability, because it is literally, the religion runs on money. And the more, the less like arbitrary the value is of, like, there's lots of tokens we have lots of tokens, and as long as we value them, we have money. At some point, you start to go. At some point, you start to hit into, we need to put new members in. we need to go full Joel Osteen and start pumping those rookie numbers up, right? You got to start getting more. And so, for example, say the Dash / Bitcoin SV / Bitcoin Cash approach is feed lots of users, pay teeny little fees, just feed them through that machine, and then it just keeps running the whole system.
Yep.
And then you get to Bitcoin Core, BTC, and now some people are going to get pissed off that I said Core, but like, what else am I going to call it to distinguish from all the other Bitcoins out there? Then that's like, well, there's a second layer on top where all the action happens, and then the settlement is now like each transaction, like the fee, the total fee, like let's put it this way, let's just say the total amount of money going through SV versus BTC is the same long term.
Sure.
The difference, again, this is the conceptual, this is the ideas-based thing. The idea is like, instead of there's thousands and thousands and millions of transactions on SV versus very few, like, 300,000-400,000 or whatever, BTC, that are much, much, much more expensive. But each one of those represents then millions of transactions somewhere else. But so ultimately, the idea is, or for something that seeks to be successful long term, is just funnel it through, just funnel as many users and fees and things through, so then the whole thing continues to run, because otherwise the whole thing starves. Otherwise, you have no security. Otherwise, you could just destroy the network in a second by just spinning up a bunch of miners for really cheap and attack it if you don't have a strong hash rate or you don't have a strong investment. Like, what happens if you have, like, say 8,000 master nodes out there, and then people could just buy half of them or something, and it's not that expensive because no one's valuing Dash, no one needs it for anything, then it's really easy to attack that part of the network. So ultimately, though, these religions collapse without a solid business acumen to them.
For sure. Now, and that's the thing, is we need volume. Every blockchain needs more volume. And Bitcoiners and XRP people and Ethereum people say, XR people. Look at them, super excited about their network volumes and stuff. And it's like, like, that's fine. But even combined, those three are not even doing a fraction of a percentage point of, just Swift, for example. Swift is doing $14-15 trillion a day in transactions. And, you got Bitcoiners talking about how the lesser coins are garbage. It's like, okay, look, if we're all on a race to Mars, like, Bitcoin is about 3 miles up, and the rest of us are about a quarter of a mile up. In, like, we haven't even exited the stratosphere yet.
What I want to know is, Kurt, and I'm not trying to catch you out here, I just want to know your thought process, because I saw you reply to a tweet from Roger recently about how Bitcoin has always gone on about digital gold. And we've already established we're both firm believers in digital cash.
Yeah. Now,
you was in Bitcoin Cash before coming over to Bitcoin SV. And as an advocate of digital cash, you know how important the merchants are. And Bitcoin Cash had built up a lot of momentum onboarding merchants. And really, I only really see Bitcoin Cash as a true competitor to Dash in terms of digital cash.
Sure.
Having the Bitcoin SV, for hash wars, then you'd lose all that momentum of those merchants. So there can't be many merchants with Bitcoin SV right now. And it's, from a merchant standpoint, you're got to accept Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV. Right. I mean, you must have really had to contemplate this. And it must have been a very difficult decision for you to make. But how did you make that decision?
And let me add some little data points to that. So before the split, Bitcoin Cash. So first off, before the split, Bitcoin had all the transactions, BTC. And then with Bitcoin Cash, at its heyday before the split, it had a little bit, consistently a certain amount higher transaction volume than Dash. Now, both Bitcoin SV and Bitcoin Cash are on the average over the last couple months, especially, and it's increasing, more recently, less volume than Dash. In fact, a lot of days SV and Bitcoin Cash together are less than what Dash has. And I have seen some days when those two plus Monero together are under what Dash has had.
Yeah,
so
SV only
basically
has 3,000 transactions right now.
So basically, this had to have been. It's a very disruptive and destructive shift. This had to have been worth it to just abandon Bitcoin Cash, which was of the three, the largest by transaction volume, and now, to go from the largest to now the smallest, to take that big step back. So basically, what I'm guessing Mark is asking is, what was so important that kind of made you want to jump from the first to the lowest?
Well, lose all that merchant adoption momentum that you built up, right? Like, because the merchants are everything, especially if you believe in digital cash.
Absolutely. And well, now it's like a 3 or 4 part question here, but So first, before the split, I was anti-split. And actually that was kind of the SV narrative. The people that put out the SV node were like, look, there's not going to be any split. In fact, Craig Wright is famous for, if you split, we bankrupt you. And the reason is exactly what you're talking about, is that we have built up a ton of momentum, or we had rather. And merchant adoption was growing with Bitcoin Cash. And that was the beauty of it, is that using, quote unquote, the real Bitcoin, the original Bitcoin economic model, that you could beat everyone in theory. And so when it was time to come to the quote unquote hash war, I was very much like, you know what, if we're going to fight and split, we just should postpone. Like, let's not do this. I am a peace advocate, period, but I'm not willing to concede peace if I believe something is morally or sometimes from a utilitarian perspective an imperative. And so
what was that thing then? What was that thing that was like the big no-go zone?
So it's network incentive. Again, like, we have to have a network that can self-sustain after the block reward runs out. We are sitting on a ticking time bomb of that subsidy. And when that subsidy runs out, if we have not figured out how to stretch our legs and just exist profitably and sustainably, then we all lose. All versions of Bitcoin lose, and it's over. I think BTC, regardless of how much hash power and transactions and all of that stuff, I think that network it's living in its own rising dust, because the network incentives are so utterly broken to mine that coin. And if the price continues to go up, if the price goes parabolic, but the transaction count per block stays low, hash power will leave that coin, because there's not that incentive to mine. So if hash power goes down as value goes up, it becomes more and more profitable to double spend Bitcoin than it does to secure Bitcoin. And it's the same thing on Bitcoin Cash. So the direction Bitcoin Cash is going is they wanted 2 layers of consensus. Avalanche is it's sort of like a proof of stake model. It's a little bit different, but it is a consensus model that could exist without proof of work. So you could just replace SHA-256 with Avalanche and run Bitcoin Cash. That is an option. But throwing that in creates 2 classes of miners. And creating 2 classes of miners, it breaks the incentive. It's central planning, in my opinion. And central planning.
Which are the 2 classes of miners? So for reference, I kind of pay attention to Avalanche. I summarize it in an article when I'm comparing it to Dash's chain locks, which are there's certain similarities, but it seems like I did read the post that my buddy Chris Pacia wrote on it, and he was basically saying it's a consensus model that instead of, say, stake, it uses proof of work instead, i.e. miners. So what are the 2 classes of miners? Because clearly it's a secondary element to the proof of work consensus. Right. But I kind of assumed that it was just all this. It was still 1 class of miners. Like,
no,
split the hair for me, because this is clearly a big decision.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to wrap my head around the important nuances, you know?
Sure. I like to compare it to a caste system. Or a caste system, depending on how you say it. But it's sort of like if you have an aristocracy, and if you have an aristocratic class, these are people that had earned a place where they're the trusted nobles who have, the special skills to be able to govern certain things better than the rabble do. And that's sort of your Bitmains, your Via BTC, like the big mining companies that and therefore you trust, because we all know we can trust Jihan Wu and all of that. So they are, let's just call them the trusted miners. They're the miners plus social consensus. And then you have, let's say, the four of us. We decide to just pool our money together, and we're going to create, Dash Rocks Bitcoin mining pool, and we're gonna throw hash at Bitcoin. Well, first of all, like, the fact that you three are wearing Dash clothing makes you guys immediately suspect, and therefore the network would want to not trust you. They will trust you less. And in an avalanche scenario, they would not allow you into the avalanche level of consensus because your commitment to the network is questionable, whereas Jihan Wu's commitment to the network is not. So a certain level of miners would have an ability to just sort of share a pre-consensus. So it's sort of like, you know what?
Let me.
It's interesting.
Kind of reintroduce the practical aspects to the theoretical. So we're talking about trusted versus not. You're talking about with Avalanche when say the miners vote on if this transaction is valid or not. You're talking about someone whose vote is being disagreed with. Is that what you mean?
Sort of, but it's complex. You're inserting an extra layer of politics into it, and that's the real problem. Is that Bitcoin, in theory, should be apolitical. The miners should be mining it simply because they either believe in the vision or they're in it for profit. And both are okay because the incentives protect the network in both scenarios. With the Avalanche, you're creating an aristocracy. And in my opinion, a caste system is just like any other level of central planning. It leads to, first of all, a whole bunch of unintended consequences, but it more typically leads to the intended consequences that the aristocrats have put in place.
Yeah,
so,
well, the thing I'm still having trouble figuring out is who are the aristocrats in here, and not just metaphorically, like who practically are the aristocrats, and and how do you decide, how do you distinguish that they are, or kind of, I guess, prove that they are?
It's the specific insiders of that side. I think it's the developers from Bitcoin ABC. And namely Amaury Sachet. A number of the developers left Bitcoin ABC like days after the fork, saying he's unbearable to work with. That basically he's he's a tyrant.
Okay, so it seems like the aristocracy then is the developer thing, and it's not that Avalanche itself establishes an aristocracy. It's that it's the result of the aristocracy, the result of a developer, or that's saying this is how we're going to do consensus.
I think it's something of a both. I think they can't exist without. It's a chicken and the egg. You need both, frankly. So I think it's an attitude thing, and it's an opportunistic thing. There's a number of other issues with what is now Bitcoin Cash. I mean, they diverged from the roadmap. I was a Bitcoin Casher because I believed in the economic model of the white paper. And on November 15th, 2018, a sizable portion of that community said, we believe in the white paper plus some of these really good ideas from these brilliant people, and we're going to go that direction. And the SV side basically was the side that are deciding to remain conservative and allow the incentive model of the white paper to play out. For better or worse, we believe primarily that Bitcoin is an experiment worth letting play out.
This is interesting because we're already coming full circle to the whole Dash hedge, because it seemed, this is my perspective, having been involved in BTC when it was kind of like SV is today, is in the same sort of a bare bones basic, scales well up to the 1 megabyte limit, right? Let's just say like up to the current usage, fees were low. Sure. Been on that, switched to Dash, and have been just watching, kind of like side eye, like just watching this whole chaos of the other stuff. It seems like, from what I've noticed, that Bitcoin Cash originally split off and was, I guess, what you would say SV is today, minus, the titanically large block size. Still a much larger block size.
Yep.
And then it seems like there's been an evolution of Bitcoin Cash, which, from my perspective, has made it more Dash-like. In that, first off, there's been talks, although I don't think it ever happened, but talks amongst mining pools to start to have a developer fund out of that then mining pools would then vote for. So that sounds like a Dash treasury where some of the block reward doesn't go straight, although instead of goes to miners and then somewhere else.
Right.
Anyway, there's that. Then there was, of course, pre-consensus type thing like Avalanche, like a chain locks kind of way, trying to chain locks instance send, sort of a way of making the final proof of work thing, trying to like make it faster, right? Improve it, sort of like instant send. Okay. And of course, then Roger Veers told me that a big priority is to add cash shuffle type functionality into Bitcoin.com wallets to increase privacy. Again, privacy. And so there's like like it seems like Bitcoin Cash is like edging towards Dash, and then Bitcoin SV is just like old schools, stick shift, no power steering, steel frame, no shock absorbers. You hit something, you'll bounce off the wall, but you'll get liquefied inside. Like one of those like old school cars. And it's so sorry.
I think that's actually, I mean, that's the simplest way to put it. I was saying from before the fork, like why try to be more Dash than Dash? Like, like if those are the things that have value, that already exists somewhere else. Like everybody, Dash was progressive enough to try a whole bunch of new ideas. So were a bunch of other projects, and something like Digibyte. Like I think Digibyte multi-shield is a brilliant idea. I don't know about the rest of the project. I think it also causes some other economic and technological problems, but it's a brilliant progressive idea. But let Digibyte do Digibyte, and let Dash do Dash, and let even Litecoin be Litecoin. But for the love of God, nobody except for the SV camp wants to let Bitcoin be Bitcoin. And
so it's an interesting bet, because while that seems to be what has your heart and mind the most, is that originalist as hell kind of vision. It seems like you're willing to entertain, as a logical, rational person, that there is another path out there that could possibly win out, which Dash is trying to build something different on top of the same basic model. So you're hedging your bets with Dash.
Sure.
And it seems like the argument is, why would I mess with SV? Because it's kind of like Dash Lite. It's like it doesn't hedge either of those two big bets.
Right.
But now
absolutely.
I can absolutely wrap my head around that point of view. Now, what I'd like to introduce for the viewers at home is a third option, because what if the answer, now this is not something that I believe, but it's out there, right? What if the answer is not Dash and it's not the original's vision? What if Dash innovated correctly but went too far from the original vision? What if the third way of Bitcoin Cash is what wins out in the end, which is the original vision plus some minor modifications? Wouldn't it be funny? Someone who's already not a complete maximalist of one or the other, who isn't Dash or SV, wouldn't someone who's already decided to diversify A or B, wouldn't that person also three-way diversify into A, B, and C? Because either of those, originalists could be wrong, progressive could be wrong, some sort of hybrid could also be wrong, but all three could also be right. So why wouldn't you invest in all three? Well, first off, do you have any BCH in your portfolio or anything meaningful?
I do, actually. So, I've got some BTC that's ancient. So I therefore have whatever the 150 forks of Bitcoin are sitting in there. They're unsplit. It's, my savings account. But, a lot of people I like to call it the three bears analogy, right? Like, well, do we want to be too hot, too cold, or do we want to be just right? And if BCH is just right, like I think there remains to be seen, first of all. And same with Dash and same with Bitcoin SV. Like, frankly, none of us have won. I don't think anybody actually has any.
No one knows anything. Let's be honest. Practically, no one has proved pretty much anything.
Right. We're competing, and that's what I love about it. Like, that's why I'm perfectly happy to have a conversation with a bunch of Dash guys, even though I consider myself functionally a Bitcoin maximalist. And it's because I want you to compete. I want you guys to come up with great ideas and implement them really, really well, because everybody else will get lazy otherwise. It's the same thing with I'm a mixed martial artist. I'm in the city of Chicago. I live in the home of Carlson Gracie Jr., who is the most important living figure in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. However, I'm on the other team. And so for us, people come to Chicago and they're like, wow, the people here are really, really ungodly tough at this sport. Why the hell are you guys so brutal? And the reason is because we have bad blood between us, and we fight like ever living hell when it comes to competition, because we don't want to lose to them and they don't want to lose to us. And it makes both of us exponentially better than if I lived in Kansas City or wherever else, where there isn't that kind of like, hey, that's the guy to beat. So ultimately, as a free market guy, or even you could say like a Darwinian participant, like that's good. It is good that junky animals go extinct and are replaced by more powerful animals. Like that's what's good for everything. So I encourage Dash, and I encourage any other project. This is actually the main reason why I hate Litecoin, is that Litecoin's objective is to be number 2. And it's like, so don't ever bet on that. That doesn't make sense at all.
You said
if aspiration, we just get this jab in here while it's still fresh. If aspirations to be, if something aspires to be number 2, then is that the strictest definition of a shitcoin?
In my opinion, sure. I think it's a clear indicator.
Number 2.
Yes.
Sorry, I got that in. I'm done.
Yeah, Brian, what do you got?
Well, you had said that you had also soured kind of on Ethereum. I was wondering why. I know they're moving to proof of stake, and you like the proof of work. Is there anything else?
Same thing.
I'm like reading my mind for my next point. So keep going.
Actually, they checkmark all of my bad boxes. They were an ICO. They are developer centralized. They specifically are at odds between developers and miners, with the developers typically winning out because Vitalik is the gravitational force in the Ethereum universe. I also think it's extremely inefficient. They claim, oh, we've got the best developers in the world, and yet they can't hit any of their benchmarks. They don't hit any of their deadlines. I think Ethereum is one colossal broken promise, and it's based entirely on ego. Like, Vitalik is a brilliant programmer, and there's a lot of brilliant computer scientists over in the Ethereum community. The problem with the Ethereum community is they have absolutely zero entrepreneurs or business people, and it shows. They don't care about their deadlines. They don't care about function. They don't care about the fact that, like, you can't run a light node. There's no SPV wallet. It's all like, no. Like, let's make it even nerdier. And as far as anything goes, like, it's absurd. I think it's an absolutely dreadful project. It's a brilliant idea. Baseline, it's a brilliant idea.
I have some Ethereum. I still have hope. What about Cardano, EOS? What do you think about
same
those?
problems? EOS has a terrible governance problem. I mean, they literally have a constitution that's written in bad old English. So for me, I'm all out.
I didn't even know that. That's hilarious.
It is ye old constitution. It's unbelievable. And
you like any smart contract type platforms?
Conceptually, yes. I believe that the best version of them would be connected to the largest proof of work chain. That should have been Bitcoin, but Bitcoin got rid of all the scripting language.
What is that, rootstock or something like that? Is
just your base opcodes. In opcodes, you can run programs, and that's another thing that I like about Bitcoin SV is that they're like, look, if we have endless blocks and we have open scripting language and we have a stable protocol, it allows people to build a program that can run on the blockchain, which is actually something that's happening in the community. Is you can upload video that plays from the blockchain, immutable. And it runs inside of a program because you can build a program into the scripting language, and it uses Bitcoin as the operating system. And that was the promise of Bitcoin all along. Core just shut it all off. They shut off the opcodes because they created some collision problems and stuff for what they wanted to do with it. But Bitcoin always had that in there. Ethereum is still based primarily on Bitcoin's code. It's built upon it, but Bitcoin itself was always supposed to be a Turing complete worldwide distributed operating system that runs entirely on incentive. So
I think you're way too hung up on the white paper. It's not the white paper that is going to bring success. It's the usability of it. People drive a car, but they don't have to know all the components of it. So if you want everyday transactions and payments, it's like the chicken egg problem. You need users and businesses as well. So like, I think I understand you had to make that philosophical choice between the different projects, right? To make your decision. But ultimately, if you want cryptocurrency to be used as digital cash, it's the solution itself that has the best user experience and is best suited for it. And the people that are going to be using it don't need to know the components and mechanisms of how it's working behind the scenes, because once it hits the mainstream, if they have to know how it works behind the scenes, then it's not good enough. It's not fit for purpose, right?
This is right. This is it's all focusing into something interesting, which is I do believe, first off, that there's two metrics. There's what we want out of things, like oh, I like this network, I don't like the way they do that thing. It's personal choice versus actual practical achievement. So you want to say a certain, and over time you'll see which networks survive and which ones don't, and most of these will just collapse. And then you'll just have a few. For example, you could say like, well, Litecoin, or you could say like when you say they say the Dash, BCH, BSV line, somewhere in there, or maybe on this side of Dash is Decred. Right. But some people might just be like, it's too small, no one cares about it or something. Or some people might be like, no, we absolutely need to. But whatever the metric, then there's Pivx somewhere, and then there's a bunch of other crap. So we could create some Venn diagrams around this, because it seems like Dash is your creative limit, that this is as far as you're willing to go. And then SV is on the other end. And then, but you don't like BCH in the middle, whatever. I'm just saying, but you have like these creative diagrams where some people might say, Dash is not adventurous enough. We need something more adventurous, which, you know, has its own problems that are outside of whether you think it's a solid idea or not.
Right.
But so war of ideas, you have all kinds of different Venn diagrams around, and you kind of like, as a rational investor, you should first off just discount all the projects that are crap, that are, I got a good idea, but they don't respond to like major threats against their blockchain. They don't do this, they don't do that, they don't whatever. Discount those. The ones that are legit, then you kind of find your circle of comfort, where some people might say, you know, Dash is at the not this limit this way, or I kind of need to have some kind of advanced privacy, which protocol level, which excludes SV and Bitcoin Cash and BTC, for example. I'm just going to exclude those because I care about this. I'm in this camp over here. Or just like, I don't want advanced cryptographic privacy codes, I believe in. And then you kind of move up here. And so what I would suggest any crypto person to do is to, first off, just exclude all the crap networks, everything that sucks, just everything that's not serious, everything, whatever. And of the rest, like define your parameters of this is your circle of inclusion. This is your sweet spot. Build out your comfort zone. Build out your comfort zone and diversify amongst those projects that are in that bubble. Sort of like how you've done with Dash versus SV. Let's just say those are the walls.
Right.
And there you go.
And it's based on governance model, and it's the same thing. There's a reason I'd be willing to live in, you know, New Hampshire. I may even be willing to live in Denmark or Spain or Sweden, but I would not be willing to live in North Korea or Venezuela, for example.
The
UK. I like the UK. I've got very few problems with the UK conceptually, but
yes, sort of like I would not be willing to continue to live in Phoenix. Too damn hot.
Right.
I would not be willing to live in, let's just say, the Northwest Territories of Canada or something.
Sure.
Way too cold. Kind of New Hampshire, southern to northern New Hampshire is like southern New Hampshire, my sweet spot. Northern is like too cold, and then Virginia.
But these are still incentives-based decisions, though. Like,
yeah, you can't come to Europe because you said ammunition is one of your currencies, so you can't bring that here. Unless you want to share a jail cell with me. So, I mean, that's not going to happen. So.
Well, I mean, and again, like that would be the kind of thing. Like, okay, I'm willing to relinquish thing A in order to get thing B. You know, maybe I want better access to bangers and mash or something.
Do you actually care about usability though? I mean, I'm being deadly serious here. Like, if this is going to work, look, my grandparents can use online banking, okay, but there's no way they could use Bitcoin. If you want to keep this as real and authentic, the original thing as possible, everyone already knows it's not ready for prime time mainstream. It's too difficult for the everyday user to use, right? So, let alone grandparents.
That's where I would say that's a big reason also why I went to the SV camp, is that the BCH camp had a bunch of very usable tools. However, during the fork, the people that signaled that they were going to the SV camp are the people that were making simple tools. So A good example is the CentBee wallet. Another one is the Handcash wallet. So you're getting rid of QR codes and long strings of the 32-digit codes for your pub key and making it just a cash handle, for example. So you can send money to me at cash handle Kurt on the network, and that's very simple there. Or something like Money Button. So you integrate your stuff one time. You basically create an account. You have ownership of your keys. It's non-custodial, but it allows people to create paywalls on any website that uses C or HTML.
But you sacrificed that usability when you went to BSV.
No, that stuff all
that moved.
Oh, has that moved over?
Correct. Yeah. Yes. BCH lost a lot of the very usable tools to BSV.
Yes. You know what's funny about that is, well, of course, there's also, it's funny because you could say, oh, I'm going to go with the original version of Bitcoin. You're on BCH. You start working hard for all. You build your business around. You build your customer base around people who use it. You build all this kind of infrastructure. Start using Handcash handles to send back and forth. Though everything's great. You're just like you're using like a ghetto version of Dash Evolution, but it's still fine. It's still better. Sorry, I just have to get digs in wherever I can.
Sure.
But again, all fairness, we're comparing something that exists now versus something that's still in the process of being brought into existence.
Sure.
You have all this stuff, and then governance bomb hits, and then all of a sudden the Handcash people migrate over to SV, and so now all of a sudden you lost a feature or you lost your customer base, one or the other. Now you're kind of screwed. Your usability features sort of migrate over because one company decided to do something, or you could have the same company decide to get block streamed.
Sure.
Now the thing is, what Blockstream did is Blockstream, and this is where I know this is always controversial because most Dash people tend to be pro Bitcoin Cash, Roger Ver, kind of that type of thing.
Sure.
But there's a few that are the opposite, which is just, for me, it's odd, but whatever. We all agree on one thing that matters. So say the Bitcoin core team kind of affected the main protocol. But what if everyone is using, like, you could call Handcash, for example, a second layer, in that even though the transactions are first layer, the relationship is a different layer.
Sure.
Protocol layer, yeah.
Yes. And so what happens if someone attacks that and you're like, we got to go back to long cryptographic addresses and stuff like that, and we miss all our contacts and our recurring payment types or whatever stuff we miss because these people got extorted by the government, that now if you want to keep using Handcash, you have to do basic KYC.
Yep.
And then now you're like, oh goodness. Or what happens if, say, Ryan X. Charles and Alex Hagoot and all the other people involved with these formerly Cash, now SV projects, what if they decide to go to Litecoin SV or something instead? Let's make it ridiculous while we're here, because there's already a Litecoin Cash. What if that split? What if they just say, oh, we're just going to migrate over? That's kind of a little bit fragile, right?
I mean,
do you think that the base Bitcoin protocol, being as ugly and unusable as it is today, is that always going to be good enough? And you can build usability solutions on top of it? Or do you think at some point you have to merge them?
I think, if you break it down to like the internet, the internet hasn't been upgraded from a protocol standpoint in about 25 years. What has been upgraded are the different layers that connect to it. We're going to create better vectors of function that go on top of it. However, the base layer, the architecture of the internet, is a stable protocol. And most of these projects, in fact, almost all of the major blockchains, fork at least once a year. They do a hard fork. They require everyone to upgrade their nodes and do all these things. I think that the one thing that Bitcoin Core got right is that they don't force everybody to upgrade their damn nodes, which allows them it allows them to say, like, we're the stable protocol, blah, blah, blah. Even though through soft fork, I think they sort of cheat their way into making the upgrades they want without forcing everybody to, and it's got its own problems. But
yeah, which, by the way, that is funny because Dash has had quite a few hard forks lately-ish. Like, when was 12.2 and when was 12.3? Those were like over the last like 12 to 18 months, and then 12.4, and that, or formerly 12.4, now 0.13, and then 0.14 is right around the corner. And then clearly the Dash community has no fear of hard forks. There's some messiness involved in the process of everyone upgrade your nodes. Oh, this pool won't do whatever. There's always a little bit of that. But it's funny how now confidential transactions.
But we have forks and stuff as well, which alleviates a lot of that pain.
Yeah, but so now you get to and the Monero is just like every 6 months. Who cares? We're just going to do just every 6 months. It's going to be mandatory chaos. But you get some with the BTC, which is we can never do this, and then you have the ugly hack of SegWit, which still like years later is still not being used for the most part, and then now you have confidential transactions, which Charlie Lee is going to try to use to bring relevance to his project again, and it's same thing, soft fork, and you have to say, well, previous addresses will say that. No, that's just an anyone can spend address, but upgraded nodes will be able to recognize that as a CT. Okay.
Well, I think all of it, ultimately it's crystal clear that almost every blockchain project is developed by people that do not understand business. They don't understand users. And in fact, they don't care. Most of the major ones, you look at things like XRP and Ethereum, like they don't care to have average people even attempt to use their product. They're trying to prune out.
Wait, are you saying that the XRP army doesn't actually use XRP for day-to-day transactions?
They could be the worst. I think they might be the worst segment of the crypto community. Frankly.
I don't know many merchants that accept XRP.
No,
from the top of my head, it's just
no.
Yeah, well, technically, it's funny because the Dash payment processor AnyPay does accept XRP for some reason, but then you look at the actual transaction volume, and it's just like, who the hell is using XRP? Among XRP fans, no one really.
Sure. I mean, XRP wants to be something different. They're trying to be some other layer of utility, which, whatever. Good luck to them. I think if ultimately everything they're trying to do works out, I think it makes some things better, and, whatever. Good luck to them.
We'll see.
It's not my journey. It's not my fight. So it's just sort of like, okay, that's fine.
Not my monkeys, not my circus. Am I right?
We should probably start wrapping up.
Yeah, I was going to say, one last question. So we spoke about NEM earlier. Now, NEM, I believe, was like number 18 in the coin market cap rankings. Yeah. So it's not like it was a low tier, crypto.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember.
There was a time it was a top 10, maybe even top 5,
right?
Yeah.
Yep. So ranked 18. In fact, it's up 1.11% in the last 24 hours.
So as NEM is now becoming the kind of the latest victim of the bear market, do you think that people will be looking at more scrutiny of their crypto projects and their portfolios, thinking, wow, look, if a number 18 project is coming a cropper right now, then surely, they're going to be much more, because potentially quite a lot of people may have lose a lot of money in NEM.
Now this is your trader acumen hat, not your philosophical hat.
So yeah,
what do you think? Do you think people will actually care?
Yeah.
Because you're advising people, right? So this is your avenue.
I'm educating people. So I teach people how to trade. I'm a technical and fundamental analyst. So I have to get into the nitty gritty, which is why my opinions are nitty gritty. Short term, nobody cares. Ethereum Classic got 51% attacked and lost $500 million overnight. The core team didn't even know. They were notified by Coinbase. Literally, nobody had an alarm on a node anywhere in the Ethereum Classic universe, which means that the miners were 100% miners that were just mining it for profit, not paying attention to the value of the chain. So nobody in Ethereum Classic cared about that blockchain. They let it be double spent for days before anybody knew. And Coinbase was looking for somebody to reach out to. Who the hell do we tell? Couldn't figure it out. However, it did not do anything outside of the average that every other coin was doing during the day, which tells me 100% that the usage on all of these blockchains is about 99% speculative. It's traders. It's people going up and down trying to extract fiat profit. They're not using any of these I mean, who could be using 2,000 blockchains today? It's absurd.
Yes, so, of course. Who could be even using one? And that's pretty funny because we're talking about, Ethereum Classic, their whole dev team got shut down or whatever, or ran out of money, and then the giant 51% attack, which is not only two existential calamities, but exposing an existential flaw. Then you have NEM, which I have no idea what's actually going on there, because so much political speak in the, like, for example, how many, like, the foundation was asked, how many people got laid off? Just so you know, we're not firing anyone, but like most of them are have to be laid off. Like almost everyone, but not everyone. But like,
we got like 1 month left of funding.
Yeah,
Right.
but no, but we've been gone forever, and it's like I have no idea what they're talking about. But we're talking about crypto projects, coin market cap ranking number 17 and 18 respectively.
Right.
Still there.
Right. Well, and it just shows. It shows how much work we all have to do. For one, something that had commercial usage would not have let any of those things happen. Something that has actual commercial usage would not be double spent because there is an incentive to mine that and keep it secure. Or NEM being a proof of stake project, it would have people that are using it, creating value there, and then it would have a self-sustaining aspect to it. And this is what I always come back to, is that the economics have to bear long-term self-sustaining, and they have to self-sustain by network usage. That's the incentive model of all cryptocurrencies. And if we don't do them, if we just, I'm wearing my stupid Bitcoin t-shirt and you guys are wearing your Dash t-shirts, and that's awesome because passion is the first thing we need. It really is. But after passion, like, we need to be doing business, and we need more people to be doing business.
So after religion, you need practical free market competition. We've come full circle, of course. And it's funny to say, because it's funny to see how ridiculous this whole usage argument, the discussion on usage is. Right. If you talk about, let's talk about Subway sandwiches, that company, or like, well, at some point you need actual customers buying sandwiches. The model has to bear out that there's enough customers buying sandwiches to fund the entire operation. Just like, why are you, this is duh. What are you, an idiot? Like, this is just literally how the world works. But somehow in crypto we have to say, oh, well, I'm a pro adoption. You have to actually like talk about that. It's just not magic. No values by magic.
I mean, we live on subsidies. The people, we live in countries and say the same kind of things. Like, I deserve free healthcare, or I deserve to have all these things, and
whoa, now it's funny how like everything ties in now.
But it's a worldview thing. People believe that somebody else can provide them value, and they can, but they can't do it forever, and they can't do it without some other incentive that brings it back somehow. And that can be like, I can decide to give to charity because it makes me feel better, because I believe it's the right thing to do, but I can't do it until I'm broke. And so I have to have that careful balance in my own budgeting, and blockchains have to do the same thing, but people don't realize that. So people look at Bitcoin and they say, I deserve to be wealthy because I'm a quote unquote early adopter. I'm going to buy Bitcoin, something, 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 I'm going to be rich. And that something, something, something better be provide other value to the world, or provide demand, provide velocity of money, or else that something, something, something is going to be hold until it loses all of its value.
It's funny. Zero Hedge, the publication.
Yeah.
Their whole thing is like, over long enough time frame, every value goes to zero.
It's true.
And it's what's funny, because sustainability, if you talk about, say, when you're talking about, say, socialist systems, or when you're talking about cryptocurrencies with no valuable economic model, the zero is just like, boom. It's just like, boom. It's not, and this can be years, many years, in fact.
Right.
But then it goes down. And you're talking about sustainable systems, and then you just go up, and eventually, there's a supernova and the world explodes, and therefore Bitcoin goes to zero at that point, or whatever you call it. There is an eventual end, but it's sustainable very long term, sometimes generationally. For example, I always look at the Kikkoman soy sauce thing, and they're like, since 16 whatever. I'm like, geez, you're like 400 years under your belt. Like, it's clearly a sustainable business model.
Right. It is. What I always say is, like, is Bitcoin a bubble? Is Dash a bubble? I always say yes. Humanity is also a bubble. We will disappear. And it doesn't mean that the things that we're doing don't have value. I think you're, well, yeah. So, and that's the point, is that my life still has value. It has value to the people that I help. It has value to the people that I'm doing business with, and everything else. But that doesn't mean that everything that I do is infinitely significant and is going to create exponential value. And that's how people feel about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And I think people need to take a step back, humble themselves, and realize, like, if I am not doing that work, if I am not creating the business, then maybe nobody will. If I'm just talking about how cool it is, and again, I'm just as guilty as anybody else of just, saying, hey, cryptocurrency is awesome and you should learn about it. Like, we need to be creating demand. Somebody needs to write a book that people actually want and only accept crypto for it. That's that's something that drives demand.
Is a very interesting thing that I'll just close out my speech on is we're talking about sustainability. Crypto is not sustainable currently. And so, for example, if I tell someone, buy Dash and use it as money, okay, you spend maybe 1%, maybe a little bit more to buy it, and then you send it, and in most cases, your fees, savings, or whatever aren't enough because you don't get any special discounts for it or whatever. Mostly, you have to do some kind of a subsidy to encourage people to get on board, meaning you have the Dash Treasury funding any pays Dashback program, where if you buy any place here around New Hampshire and some other places, you spend, you get like 10% back. It's like, oh, all of a sudden I have an economic incentive, and that kind of gets you going. Or in the other cases, the economic incentive is you have happy, excited fans who are willing to act against their immediate economic self-interest because they perceive value from spending crypto.
Mm-hmm.
Then what happens is when you have a viable economic system, like let's just say Dash or a originalist Bitcoin, then you say, okay, well, now the merchant processor is going to start charging more to do credit cards or cash or whatever because there's extra time and labor and less security involved in that, and therefore it costs you nothing to acquire Bitcoin or Dash because you just get paid in it. And then you spend it, and then the merchant actually gives you 10% off when you do it or whatever because it costs them less, or what's that? And then you have the velocity of money happens, and then at that point you don't have to convince people.
Sure,
think it till you make it. Am I right?
Absolutely. You have to push until people pull. Absolutely. Long story short.
All right, Mark.
Yeah, mate, it's been a fantastic podcast. I've really enjoyed Kurt coming on. Thank you so much for coming on. Please come back on the podcast again, because I feel like this could have gone on for hours, and I still have so many questions. But Kurt, where can we follow you, and where can people find out more about Crypto Traders Pro?
CryptoTradersPro.com is the universe of all of that. It'll connect you to our YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and everything else. I am Kurt Wuckert JR at literally everywhere, anywhere where there is social media happening. None of my stuff is private. Follow me. I'm happy to be friends with everybody. So whatever, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Kurt Wuckert JR. That's where I'm at. Feel free, follow me. I interact with everybody. So it's good for me, good for you, and mutual exchange and all of that jazz.
But are you in the Dash Talk Discord though? That's the big question.
I am actually. I am in. I'm in 2 Dash Discord, so I'm in the hard fork and the.
Well, you're in the Dash Discord and the Dash Discord EV Evan's Vision.
Yes, precisely.
Excellent. Right, well, as we're talking about Discords, I'll pass it over to Joel.
You need to smash for Dash. I mean, smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and make sure you share this everywhere. Like, share, subscribe, comment, leave some comments. I actually do read them go through the podcast. So like, oh, what did this person say? This person talked smack about my hair again. So, which isn't a problem for Mark, but whatever. So it's just me. So we got remember, we have audio only versions of this because a lot of people say, why don't you do audio? We do. Okay, every Saturday Mark puts out a post, the recap post of this podcast, and has all the audio links in iTunes, Stitcher, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So subscribe to that. Now, if you want the after party, we do this kind of a thing, less structure, more private, on the Dash Talk Discord. StayDashy.com gets you in, and we just go on like this for up to 10 people at a time for, sometimes until the sun comes up, Mark's time, which I'm trying to get him to not do. But we can just carry this on. So you go to StayDashy.com, get into the Dash Talk Discord, just start asking, hey, where's the after party at? Where's the after party at? And we'll get you in. With any luck, we can get Kurt in there too. And yeah, that's my piece. Mark, you ready?
Yeah, that was fantastic. Yeah, so that was episode 89 of the Dash podcast.
What was my grandpa?
Yep. And just to reiterate what Joel said, please like, share, and subscribe. Smash for Dash. Have a fantastic weekend. Stay positive. Stay humble. But most importantly, stay dashy. Have a great weekend, everyone. Cheerio.
Peace.